The shuttle smelled like rust and old fuel. Nora Lindgren sat in the back row with her knees pressed against a metal crate full of sensor equipment. She was the only human on board. The other passengers, for Torvin soldiers built like walking tanks and two quiet Finn scouts with silver fur, had not spoken a single word to her since departure. They glanced at her, sometimes the way someone might glance at luggage that had been placed in the wrong seat. Through the small window, she watched the planet grow closer. Draven 4, a death-class world covered in thick jungles that glowed faintly blue and green, even from orbit. Swamps full of acid. Mountains crawling with predators that had no natural fear of anything. It was considered one of the worst assignments in the galactic frontier, and Nora had volunteered for it. The shuttle punched through the atmosphere with a hard shake that rattled her teeth. When it finally landed on a cracked stone platform surrounded by tall metal walls, Nora grabbed her bags and stepped out in air that was thick and warm and tasted like wet copper. Outpost Far Wall was not impressive. It was a collection of gray buildings surrounded by reinforced walls standing about 30 feet high. Guard towers sat at every corner. Scorch marks decorated the outer walls in long black streaks, evidence of past attacks from the wildlife beyond the perimeter. About 200 personnel from 5 different species lived and worked here, mining rare minerals from the mountains and trying not to get eaten in the process. Nora was met at the landing platform by a young Finn named Suli. He was short, barely reaching her chest, with large amber eyes and ears that swiveled like satellite dishes. He carried a data pad and walked fast. "You are the human," he said. It was not a question. Nora Lindgren, xenobiologist. Suli looked at her bags. No weapons, just equipment cases and a worn field jacket tied around her waist. His ears flattened slightly, which Nora had read was a sign of doubt among the Finn. He said nothing more and led her across the outpost toward the main hall. The orientation was held in a wide room with metal benches. About 40 personnel sat waiting. At the front stood Commandant Gristle, a Torvin officer who was nearly 7 feet tall with dark green scales and a jaw that looked like it could bite through steel. He was reading assignments from a list and did not look up when Nora entered. She sat in the back. Suli sat 3 rows ahead and did not look at her. Gristle finished his list and then paused. He looked up and found Nora in the back row. A slow grin spread across his wide mouth. "And here we have our human," he said. His voice was deep enough to vibrate in her chest. "Nora Lindgren, xenobiologist, sent to us to study the animals." A few Torvin soldiers chuckled. "Tell me, human," Gristle continued, stepping closer. "Do you know what the average survival time is for an unarmed researcher outside these walls?" Nora looked at him calmly. "I read the reports." "Then you know it is 11 minutes. More laughter. Gristle spread his arms wide, playing to his audience. 11 minutes. And this one does not even carry a sidearm. She carries nutrition samples and a medical kit. He shook his head slowly. "Humans, the galaxy's pets. You survive only because stronger species tolerate you." The room laughed openly now. Even the Finn smiled, though they tried to hide it. Nora did not react. She did not argue. She did not look away from Gristle either. She simply nodded once, picked up her bags when the orientation ended, and walked to her assigned quarters. They had given her the worst housing available, a small metal box near the outer wall where the hum of the perimeter generators was constant and the vibrations from the jungle beyond could be felt through the floor at night. She set down her bags, unrolled her sleeping mat, and powered on her data terminal. That first night, while the rest of the outpost ate and laughed and talked about the fragile human who would probably die within a week, Nora sat alone in her quarters and began reviewing every piece of ecological data the outpost had ever collected about Draven 4. Most of it was incomplete. Survey teams rarely lasted long enough to gather anything detailed. The data was scattered, full of gaps, and poorly organized, but Nora was patient. She read for hours, cross-referencing predator sighting logs with seasonal weather patterns and mineral deposit locations. Slowly, a picture began to form. Something in the migration patterns of the planet's apex predators did not match random movement. There was a rhythm to it, a direction. She pulled up a map of the outpost location and overlaid the migration data. Her fingers paused on the screen. The outpost was sitting directly in the path of something. She stared at the map for a long time. Then she saved her notes, turned off the terminal, and laid down on her mat in the dark. Through the thin wall, she could hear the jungle. It was alive with sounds, low growls, high clicking noises, and the distant rumble of something very large moving through the trees. Nora closed her eyes. She did not tell anyone what she had found. Not yet. She had learned a long time ago that people who already think you are a fool will not listen to your warnings. She would need proof first, and to get proof, she would need to go outside those walls. 3 days after her arrival, Nora walked out through the south gate, carrying nothing but a field pack, a scanner, and a bag of nutrient samples she had synthesized in the outpost lab the night before. The gate guard, a Torvan soldier with a scar running down his snout, watched her go and shook his head slowly. Word spread fast. By the time she had crossed 50 meters into the jungle, there were already a dozen personnel standing on the south wall, watching her small figure disappear into the glowing undergrowth. Someone started a betting pool. The most popular wager was 3 days before she was dragged back in pieces. The jungle on Draven, for was nothing like the forests of Earth. The trees were enormous and twisted, their bark covered in soft bioluminescent moss that pulsed with a faint blue light. Vines as thick as her arm hung from branches 100 feet above. The air was heavy and wet, full of strange smells that her nose could not identify. Every few seconds, something moved in the shadows. Nora was not afraid. She was careful, which was different. She had spent 3 nights studying the behavioral data of every predator species cataloged on Draven 4. She knew which ones were territorial and which ones roamed. She knew which ones hunted by sight and which hunted by scent. She knew their feeding schedules, their nesting habits, and the chemical markers they used to claim space. That on her first day out, she found a den of ridge stalkers, lean predators about the size of wolves with 6 legs and jaws full of hooked teeth. The standard military protocol was to mark the den and call in a suppression team. Nora did something different. She opened her pack, pulled out a small container of synthesized nutrients matched to the ridge stalker's dietary profile, and placed it carefully near the entrance of the den. Then she backed away slowly and sat down behind a fallen tree about 20 meters away. She waited. After almost an hour, a ridge stalker emerged. It was cautious, moving low to the ground with its 6 legs spread wide. It sniffed the air, found the nutrient pack, and circled it several times. Then it ate. It looked toward where Nora sat. She did not move. It watched her for a long moment and then returned to the den. The next day, she came back. She left another offering, this time a little closer to her position. The ridge stalker emerged faster this time. It ate and looked at her again. She remained still. It did not growl. It did not charge. After a few minutes, it simply turned and went back inside. By the 5th day, 3 ridge stalkers came out when she arrived. They ate the food and sat in the open, watching her with their flat yellow eyes. One of them lay down. From his patrol route along the southern perimeter, Sully saw all of this. He had been assigned to monitor the sectors near where Nora worked, and each day he found himself stopping longer to watch her through his scope. What she was doing made no sense to him. Every species on the frontier knew that predators were threats to be controlled, driven back, or destroyed. Nobody fed them. Nobody sat with them. On the 6th day, Sully broke from his patrol and approached her as she was returning to the outpost. "What are you doing out there?" he demanded. His amber eyes were sharp and his ears were pinned back. Nora adjusted her pack on her shoulder. "Learning. You are feeding apex predators. You're making them comfortable near the outpost." That is not learning. That is dangerous. They were already near the outpost. Nora said simply, I'm just the first person to ask why. Sully opened his mouth and then closed it. He did not have an answer for that. He walked away without another word, but Nora noticed that his ears had shifted forward slightly before he turned. Curiosity. She had read about that too. That evening, Gristle held a general assembly. He stood at the front of the hall with his arms crossed and a grin on his face that showed all of his teeth. I have received reports, he announced, that our human guest has been hand-feeding the wildlife of Draven for like a house pet. The room erupted in laughter. Gristle waited for it to die down. I want to assure everyone that when she inevitably gets herself killed, I will personally write the most generous incident report the Galactic Frontier Commission has ever seen. More laughter. Nora was not in the room. She was in her quarters, reviewing the day's scanner data. The Ridgestalkers' movement patterns over the past week were confirming what she had suspected. They were not hunting randomly. They were following a path, a seasonal corridor that ran directly through the outpost territory. She added the data to her growing map and saved it. Then she prepared her pack for the next morning. Outside her wall, the jungle pulsed with light and sound. Something roared in the distance, deep and long, a sound that made the floor vibrate. The Torvan guards on the wall tightened their grips on their weapons. Nora listened to the roar and wrote a note in her LOGIT read, Broodmother. Approximate distance, 12 kilometers. Moving south-southeast. Consistent with predicted migration corridor. She underlined the last word twice and then went to sleep. The storm came without warning on the 14th day. Nora had been 2 kilometers south of the outpost, collecting soil samples near a fungal grove when the sky changed. One moment, it was the usual gray-green haze of Draven 4's atmosphere. The next, the clouds turned black and dropped so low they seemed to touch the treetops. A wind hit the jungle like a wall, bending the massive trees sideways and tearing the bioluminescent moss from the bark in long, glowing strips. She started running back toward the outpost immediately. The rain came next, thick and warm, and so heavy she could barely see 5 meters in front of her. Lightning struck the canopy above, splitting a tree with a crack that shook the ground beneath her feet. The jungle was screaming with the sounds of animals fleeing in every direction. She was still a kilometer out when she heard the breached IT was a deep metallic groan followed by a crash that cut through even the roar of the storm. She knew what it meant. Something had hit the outpost wall. A moment later, the emergency sirens began wailing, barely audible through the wind. Nora changed direction, moving toward higher ground where the trees were thicker and the terrain offered cover. She could not reach the outpost. The path between her and the south gate was now flooded with fast-moving water pouring down from the highlands. And through the rain, she could see dark shapes moving in the flood. Ridgestalkers, dozens of them, driven from their dens by the rising water and running blind with panic. She climbed. Her boots slipped on the wet roots of a fungal tree, and she pulled herself up using the thick vines that hung from the branches. She found a wide fork in the trunk about 4 meters off the ground and wedged herself into it, wrapping a vine around her waist to keep from falling. Her field pack was soaked. Her scanner was cracked but still working. Below her, the jungle floor had become a river. She watched the water rise and carry debris and small animals past her position. The sounds of the outpost sirens faded as the storm intensified. Then they stopped entirely. She was alone. Back at Outpost Farwall, the damage was severe. A pack of Ridgestalkers, driven mad by the storm, had crashed through a weakened section of the east wall. 8 soldiers were injured. The power grid had failed and communications were down. Gristle stood in the command center barking orders while repair teams worked through the night. That IT was Sully who raised the question. The human, he said, standing in the doorway of the command center, dripping wet. Nora Lindgren. She was outside the wall when the storm hit. Gristle did not look up from his console. I am aware. We need to send a search team. We need to repair a wall, restore power, and treat 8 wounded soldiers, Gristle said flatly. I will not waste resources on one unarmed human who chose to walk into the jungle alone. She could still be alive. She is not. Gristle turned to face Sully. His yellow eyes were cold. The highlands flooded within minutes. Nothing survives that. Mark her as lost and reassign her quarters. Sully stood in the doorway for a long moment. His ears were flat against his skull, and his claws were digging into the doorframe. Then he turned and walked away. He did not mark her as lost. Not in his own logs that I in the highlands. The storm raged for 2 full days. Nora stayed in the tree for the first night, barely sleeping, her body shaking from the cold. When the water level finally dropped enough to walk, she climbed down and assessed her situation. Her pack contained half a ration bar, a crack scanner, a small medical kit, a water purifier that still worked, and a bag of nutrient samples she had prepared for her field work. Her communication device was dead. She had no weapon, no shelter, and no idea if the outpost was even still standing. She stood in the ruined jungle and looked around. The storm had torn the canopy open, letting pale light filter down to the forest floor for the first time in probably centuries. Fallen trees lay in every direction. The ground was thick with mud and debris. The air smelled like ozone and rot. She had 2 choices. She could try to find her way back to the outpost through the flooded lowlands, where panicked predators were still running loose. Or she could move deeper into the highlands, where the ground was higher, the flooding was less severe, and she had a better chance of finding food and shelter. She chose the highlands. That IT was not a decision made from fear. It was made from knowledge. She had studied the topographic maps. She knew the highland ridges ran roughly parallel to the outpost position. If she followed them north, she would eventually circle back to the outpost from the high ground. It would take longer, but it was survivable. Nora tightened the straps on her pack, checked her scanner one more time, and started walking north into the deepest, most uncharted region of Draven. 4 up behind her, the jungle was already closing the gaps the storm had torn open. Vines reached across fallen trunks. Moss spread over broken bark. The forest was healing itself, indifferent to the small human walking through its heart. She did not look back. On the 3rd day alone in the highlands, Nora found water by watching the insects. She had noticed a species of small glowing beetles moving in a steady line across the forest floor, all heading in the same direction. On Earth, insects often followed moisture gradients. She decided to follow them. 20 minutes later, the beetles led her to a spring bubbling up between 2 flat rocks, clear and cold, filtered through the mineral-rich highland stone. She filled her purifier and drank until her stomach ached. Then she sat beside the spring and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to feel how tired and scared she actually was. Her hands were shaking. Her legs were covered in scratches from thorn vines. She had not eaten a full meal in 2 days. The half-ration bar was gone, and the nutrient samples in her bag were designed for alien predators, not human stomachs. 2 minutes passed. She stood up and kept moving. Survival on Draven was not about strength. Nora had known that before she ever set foot on the planet. The Torvin soldiers were 10 times stronger than her. They had armor-plated skin and claws that could tear through metal. And they still lost people regularly on this world. Strength alone was not enough here. The planet did not care how strong you were, but it could be read. Every ecosystem had a language, and Nora had spent her entire career learning how to listen. She avoided the territorial zones of large predators by reading the claw marks on the trees. Deep marks at a certain height meant a ridgestalker alpha had claimed the area. She went around. She found edible fungus by watching which species the small herbivores ate from. If a local animal could digest it, her purifier could process it into something safe enough for her stomach. It tasted terrible, but it kept her moving. On the 5th day, she discovered that the root systems of the giant fungal trees were hollow in places, forming natural shelters large enough to sleep inside. The roots radiated a gentle warmth from the decomposition process happening deep underground, and the thick walls blocked wind and rain. She made a camp inside one and slept for 6 straight hours, the most rest she had gotten since the storm on the seventh day. She found the juvenile that it was lying in a shallow depression between two fallen trees, half hidden by moss. At first she thought it was dead. It was about the size of a large dog, covered in dark armored plates with a long tail curled around its body. Its breathing was shallow and uneven. A deep gash ran along its left side, swollen and dark with infection. Nora recognized the species immediately. It was a young broodmother offspring, the apex predator of Draven 4, the creature that every soldier on the planet feared above all others. Adult broodmothers were the size of shuttles, nearly indestructible, and fiercely protective of their young. Every survival protocol said the same thing. If you find a broodmother offspring, leave the area immediately. The mother will be nearby, and she will kill anything that comes close. Nora knelt down beside it. The juvenile flinched when she touched its side. Its small eyes opened, dark and glassy with fever. It tried to growl, but the sound came out as a weak rasp. It was dying. The infection had probably been spreading for days, maybe since the storm. She opened her medical kit. It was designed for human injuries, but infection was infection. She cleaned the wound carefully, flushing it with antiseptic solution that made the juvenile twitch and hiss. She applied a broad-spectrum antibiotic gel along the length of the gash, and then covered it with a flexible bandage from her dwindling supply. Then she sat beside it and waited. The juvenile watched her with one half-open eye. After an hour, its breathing steadied slightly. Nora opened her pack and pulled out one of the remaining nutrient samples. She had formulated these for ridge stalkers, but the base protein compounds were close enough. She softened the sample with water and held it near the juvenile's mouth that it ate. Slowly, weakly, but it ate. She stayed with it through the night, sleeping in short bursts with her back against the fallen tree and the juvenile curled a few feet away. By morning, the swelling around the wound had gone down slightly. The juvenile lifted its head for the first time and looked at her steadily. She gave it more food. It stood on shaking legs. Then it followed her when she began walking. She did not chase it away. She let it walk beside her, adjusting her pace to match its slow steps. For 2 more days they moved through the highlands together, the small armored creature staying close to her left side like a shadow did on the 9th day. The jungle went completely silent. Every insect stopped clicking. Every bird stopped calling. The fungal trees seemed to hold their breath. Nora froze. The juvenile pressed itself against her leg and made a low keening sound she had never heard before. Then the canopy above them parted. The brood mother was enormous. Its body blocked out the pale sky. Armored plates layered over thick muscle, each plate scarred and weathered from decades of life on the most dangerous planet in the sector. Its head was wide and flat with 4 deep-set eyes that glowed faintly amber in the dim light. When it breathed, the air around Nora moved. It looked at the juvenile. Then it looked at Nora. Nora did not run. She stood perfectly still with her hands open at her sides and her eyes lowered, the same posture she had used with the ridgestalkers weeks ago. Calm, non-threatening, present. The broodmother lowered its massive head until it was level with Nora's chest. It smelled like iron and rain and deep earth. It sniffed the bandage on its offspring. It sniffed Nora's hands, her pack, her face. Then it pulled back and lowered its head to the ground in front of her. Nora let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Her legs were shaking. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel in her teeth, but she was alive. And the most feared creature on Draven, for had just bowed to her. 12 days after the storm, a guard on the south wall of Outpost Farwall saw something moving at the edge of the jungle and nearly fell off his post. He grabbed his scope with both hands and pressed it against his face so hard it left a ring around his eye. Then he hit the alarm. The siren brought every soldier to the walls within 2 minutes. Weapons were drawn. Shields were activated. Gristle stormed up the stairs to the south wall with his sidearm already in his hand and his jaw locked tight. The outpost had been on edge since the storm. The wall repairs were barely finished. Another breach would be catastrophic. Report. He barked at the guard. The guard did not answer. He just pointed .AT the tree line about 200 meters from the gate. A figure emerged from the jungle. It was small. It was walking upright. It was covered in dried mud and bioluminescent residue that made it glow faintly green and blue in the pale morning light. IT was Nora. She walked calmly across the open ground toward the outpost, her field pack hanging off one shoulder, her boots leaving deep prints in the soft earth. Her clothes were torn. Her face was thin. There were scratches and bruises covering her arms, and a makeshift bandage wrapped around her left hand, where she had cut it on a rock 3 days ago. Behind her, about 10 meters back, walked the juvenile broodmother. It moved on steady legs now, its armored plates catching the light, its dark eyes scanning the walls of the outpost with cautious intelligence. The bandage on its side was dirty but intact. Nobody on the wall moved. Then someone looked up and the silence became something deeper. Above the tree line, just barely visible against the gray sky, the broodmother followed. It moved through the canopy like a mountain moving through clouds, each step deliberate and slow. Its 4 amber eyes were fixed on the outpost. Its armored body was so large that the trees bent away from it as it passed. The ground trembled slightly with each footfall. "Open the gate," someone said. Nobody did. Gristle stood on the wall and stared. His sidearm was still in his hand, but it hung at his side like he had forgotten it was there. His mouth was open. In the years he had commanded Outpost Farwall, he had lost 11 soldiers to broodmothers. He had called in orbital strikes to drive them away from the perimeter. He had watched the best Torvan warriors charge at these creatures and get swatted aside like insects. And now one was walking behind a single unarmed human like a guard dog following its owner home. Nora reached the gate and stopped. She looked up at the wall. "I would like to come inside," she said. Her voice was hoarse and quiet, but perfectly steady. The gate opened. Nora walked through. The juvenile followed her 3 steps inside and then stopped, looking around at the soldiers with a low rumble in its chest. Beyond the wall, the broodmother stopped at the tree line and settled onto its haunches, watching. It did not advance. It did not leave. Soldiers pressed themselves against the walls as Nora walked through the outpost. Torvan warriors who had laughed at her 2 weeks ago now stepped aside and would not meet her eyes. Fen scouts watched from doorways with their ears straight up, a posture Nora knew meant deep respect or deep fear. Sometimes both. Sully met her halfway across the central yard. He was running. When he reached her, he stopped short and looked at her like she was something he had never seen before. Nora reached in her pack and pulled out a data chip. It was cracked and dirty, but functional. She held it out to him. 2 weeks of ecological survey data, she said. Full highland mapping, migration corridors, nesting sites, predator behavioral profiles. Everything the outpost has been trying to collect for years. Sully took the chip. His hands were shaking. "There is something important on there," Nora continued. "The migration pattern I flagged on my first night. I have confirmed it. The broodmothers follow a seasonal corridor through these lowlands. It is the same path every cycle. The outpost is built directly in the middle of it." Sully looked at her. "That means the attacks were never attacks," Nora said. "They were trying to get through. We are in their way. Every year, they come through this corridor to reach breeding grounds in the southern valleys. And every year, they find a military outpost blocking their path. So they push through it. That is not aggression. That is migration." The words hung in the air. Around them, soldiers who had been listening went very still. Years of casualties. Years of reinforced walls and heavy weapons and orbital support requests. Years of treating the broodmothers as mindless monsters laying siege to their position. And the truth was so simple it hurt. The outpost was just in the way. Nora swayed on her feet. Sully caught her arm. "I need to eat something," she said quietly. "And I need someone to check the juvenile's bandage. The infection was clearing, but I ran out of antibiotic gel 2 days ago." Sully nodded and led her toward the medical bay. As they walked, Nora glanced back at the south gate. Through the gap in the closing doors, she could see the broodmother still sitting at the tree line, patient and still, waiting for its offspring. Nobody on the wall had fired a single shot. The outpost moved at IT took 3 weeks. Engineers dismantled the wall sections and rebuilt them 4 kilometers east on a rocky plateau well outside the migration corridor Nora had mapped. Supply shuttles brought extra materials. Soldiers who had spent years fighting the jungle now worked alongside construction drones, hauling metal panels and drilling foundations into the highland stone. Nobody complained. The data was too clear to argue with. Nora spent those 3 weeks in the field, finalizing her ecological survey and guiding the placement of the new perimeter based on predator territory boundaries, water sources, and wind patterns. She marked safe zones and danger zones. She identified which areas could be cleared for construction and which needed to be left untouched. Sully was with her every day. He had formally requested reassignment as her field partner, and the request had been approved without argument. He carried a scanner now instead of just a weapon. His ears stayed forward most of the time, which Nora had come to recognize as his natural state when he was learning something new. The juvenile broodmother stayed near the old outpost site for the first week, sleeping in the empty yard where Nora's quarters had been. When the last wall section was taken down, it wandered to the tree line and disappeared into the jungle. Nora watched it go from the ridge above and said nothing. She did not need it to stay. That was never the point that on the day the new outpost was declared operational, Gristle came to see her. She was sitting on a rock near the eastern perimeter, eating a ration pack and reviewing data on her repaired scanner. She heard his heavy footsteps before she saw him. Torvin's soldiers did not move quietly. He stopped about 3 meters away and stood there. He was not wearing a sidearm. His arms hung at his sides, and his posture was different from anything she had seen from him before. Smaller somehow, like the armor plating on his body could not protect him from whatever he was feeling. "Lindgren," he said. Nora looked up. "Commandant." He opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words that tasted bad. Nora waited. She had learned patience from sitting with animals that could kill her. So waiting for a proud soldier to find his words was nothing. "I was wrong," he said finally. The words came out rough, like they had been dragged over gravel. "About you. About your kind. I was wrong." Nora looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. The same quiet nod she had given him on her first day, when he had called humans the galaxy's pets in front of the entire outpost. Gristle stared at her. He seemed to be waiting for something. Anger, maybe. Satisfaction. A speech. Some kind of victory. Nora just went back to her scanner. After a long pause, Gristle turned and walked away. He was reassigned to a different outpost 2 days later. Before he boarded his shuttle, he stood on the landing platform and looked out at the jungle one last time. He did not say goodbye to anyone. He just left in the weeks that followed. Things changed at Outpost Farwall. Not all at once, and not with any announcement. But the change was real. Nora held informal sessions in the evenings where she shared her ecological data with anyone who wanted to learn. Finn scouts started carrying nutrient samples alongside their weapons. 2 Torvin soldiers asked her to teach them how to read predator territorial markers. The broodmother migration came 6 weeks after the outpost had been relocated. Nora and Sully watched from the eastern ridge as 4 adult broodmothers and 9 juveniles passed through the lowland corridor below. They moved slowly, their massive bodies parting the jungle like ships moving through a green sea. They passed through the empty ground where the old outpost had stood without slowing down. No walls to crash through, no soldiers to fight. Just open path. Sully sat beside Nora and watched them go. They are beautiful, he said quietly, like he was surprised by his own words. They always were, Nora said. Word of what happened on Draven, for traveled through the Galactic Frontier Commission's network faster than any official report. It was not the data that people talked about, although the data was extraordinary. It was the story. A single human, unarmed and alone, had survived 12 days in the most dangerous wilderness on a death-class world. She had tamed the untamable. She had solved the problem that military force had failed to solve for years. And she had done it all without firing a single shot. Other death-class outposts began submitting requests for human xenobiologists. The requests specifically cited Nora's methods. The Frontier Commission's board quietly added a new section to their operational guidelines about ecological integration, a section that had not existed before on a station 3 sectors away. A Torvan commander sat in his office reading the full report from Draven 4. His lieutenant stood in the doorway, waiting. The commander set the report down and looked up. "Remind me," he said slowly, "what do we call humans?" "Soft, sir." The commander was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. "Never mock the soft ones," he said. "They conquer what we cannot even survive." Back on Draven 4, Nora did not hear any of this. She did not know about the requests or the guideline changes or the conversations happening on stations she had never visited. She was already back in the highlands with Sully at her side, studying a new species of burrowing creature that lived in the root systems of the fungal trees. She was sitting in the dirt with her scanner in her lap and mud on her knees, doing exactly what she had always done, listening to the world around her. And the world, for the first time in a long time, was listening back.